What's the difference between a new financial advisor and a large cheese pizza? Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today. And in today's episode, we have 2025 financial advisor compensation. Before we get into it today, a couple quick announcements as usual. First, want to let you guys know that we are, it looks like, in 83 countries, 1,225 total cities. Obviously, we're a U.S.-based show. Top 5 countries we have in order: U.S., Australia, Canada, Germany, and United Kingdom. So, well, actually, United States, Australia, Canada, Germany, and United Kingdom are actually tied. So we'll go ahead and call them both, what's that, 1, 2, 3, number 4. And so that puts Zambia at number 5. Thanks to everybody for listening to the show. As always, we appreciate it. We still have our premium subscriber referral promotion going on. And speaking of, I'm actually going to draw the name, and I just drew it before the show, a little bit early this quarter. So we spun the wheel on wheelofnames.com. And the winner for a 2025. The winner for a $25 Amazon e-gift card is Donald K.
Woo!
So thanks to Donald K for being premium.
Premium!
No offense, Brandon A, but glad to see you didn't win 3 in a row. We got to give somebody else a shot. So shout out to Donald K. You'll be receiving that $25 Amazon e-gift card in your email shortly. All right. Not a ton of announcements really today. So hopefully you guys had a chance to check out last episode on Got an IP Pin. I think that is very important, and can't say enough about that. So it looks like we've had some folks listening to that show, but if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, please do. Today, we are going to cover financial advisor compensation. And I wasn't really sure whether or not to do this show, but I saw a very interesting study that came out recently from the CFP board, the Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, with their 2025 compensation study. And I actually thought it was pretty interesting. And some of you may have advisors or potentially are considering a career change. Maybe you're thinking about becoming an advisor, or in this case, more specifically, and they have advisors and non-advisors, advisors that are CFPs and non-CFPs that were polled, and we'll talk about that here in a second as part of this survey. But you might be wondering, what's compensation look like for that? Is that something that I would, be okay with the compensation for? Is that something that I'm interested in? Or maybe you're just nosy and want to know how much is my advisor making, that type of thing. We had some numbers here to go over with you, and I thought that as I was reading through the report, I thought, if I wasn't in the industry, and even being in the industry, obviously, and reading through this, I thought it was pretty interesting. And they broke it up a bunch of different ways. I'm not going to get into that granular level of detail, but I am going to hit some of the highlights of their compensation study, and hopefully you find this interesting. So it kind of kicks off with, it's a big-ass PDF file with a bunch of information, and, I will say that it is kind of sort of like a pitch for the CFP board to interest folks that are in the industry in obtaining their CFP, their Certified Financial Planner designation, which is really a big deal. It's kind of the gold standard in the industry in the opinion of many, and I am a CFP certificate myself. And so anyway, they're kind of pitching this in a sense to folks that may not necessarily have the CFP credential as to why they might want to consider that. So if we kind of, sift through that a little bit and really get into some of the numbers, I think we can get out of this really what we want to. But they start off with, Americans increasingly view their careers as more than just a paycheck. And, some people do, some people don't. That's probably going to vary widely. It talks about things like sense of purpose, work-life balance, career flexibility, generous benefits, positively impacting lives of others, rewarding compensation, and then opportunities for career and personal growth. I think you could say that that would apply across the board pretty much to any industry. So it's not something that is necessarily exclusive to financial services, but they sort of kick it off with that. And the study itself, I highlighted a few things as I'm scrolling through and recording this podcast. So the research team at the CFP board collaborated with research firm Industry Insights to compile compensation data from CFP professionals and financial planners who do not hold CFP certification across the United States. From mid-April to mid-June 2025, Industry Insights collected compensation data from 1,489 financial planners. The data, which serve as the basis of this report, are subject to a margin of error of plus or minus 2.6% at a 95% confidence interval, at a 95% confidence level. So pretty much, even though they only surveyed just under 1,500 people, they believe it to be extremely accurate. So some key takeaways from this study. It says here that CFP professionals enjoy robust compensation and high levels of job satisfaction. According to their study, in 2024, total compensation for financial planners the median value was $185,000. Then goes on to say that CFP professionals earn 13% more than other financial planners, and basically people that don't have the CFP credential. Financial planners are likely to earn more money if they have more experience or if they supervise staff. And I think that probably is like, no shit, Sherlock. It kind of goes without saying. They go on, there's about a half a dozen different categories that talk about access to generous benefits and flexible work arrangements. So of the people that were surveyed, 96% of them had defined contribution retirement benefits, basically a 401k plan or some sort of equivalent, which is probably no surprise given the fact that you're working in the financial services industry. 90% had health insurance, 85% had dental insurance, 83% had disability insurance, 79% had vision insurance, and 57% had hybrid work. And I think that's a big one. And I don't think, again, that that's not necessarily just for financial services, but across the board, it's probably no secret to anybody that more and more people are working remotely, or at least a portion of their work week is done on a remote basis. And I personally do also like that hybrid type of schedule where some things are in person and some things are remote. Now, depending on the type of firm that you may work for, regardless of the industry, but going back to specifically financial services, you may have to come into an office every single day, just by the nature of how that's structured. Maybe there's some days you can work from home, some days that you have to be in the office. Maybe you have to be in the office every single day. I know when I first started in the industry, I had to be in office every single day. There were certain expectations there. And then I think for a lot of people, as time went on, and when COVID first happened, I think that opened up a lot of employers' eyes to the possibilities of remote work. And with that comes different challenges and also opportunities. But some people will have access to hybrid work, some won't. But 57%, according to this study, had access to a hybrid work environment. So that, I would say that that's decent. It says that 84% of financial planners are highly fulfilled with their career, and that career satisfaction is high with stability, which we'll come back to, work-life balance, and advancement opportunities. And then they have a section which we've kind of already covered about compensation. Says that CFP professionals earn 13% more than financial planners who do not have CFP certification, even after accounting for other factors such as years of experience, company size, and job role. Before we continue, this used to be a joke that we would tell all the time. We'll see if you guys know it. What's the difference between a new financial advisor and a large cheese pizza? What's the difference between a new financial advisor and a large cheese pizza? A large cheese pizza can feed a family of 4. So it's no secret that typically when you start out in this industry, it is very difficult, and that's why most people don't make it. And there's a bunch of different business models out there. That's something else that has changed, and I think the industry is trying to do as much as they can to continue to change that for the better, because a lot of companies have business models where they take a whole bunch of people, throw them all to the wall, and see who sticks, knowing that the vast majority of them are going to fail out and not be able to make it. Because a lot of firms, historically anyway, it was sort of an eat what you kill type of environment, and maybe you would be on some type of stipend or salary for a short period of time, and then eventually you would be weaned off of that and be commissioned only, or fee based only, or fee and commission. And some firms will start you there basically from day one, or they're pretty close to that, and it's sort of up to you to be able to sustain. Now, there's different roles, and they don't really talk much about this in their particular study, but for those that are curious, there are different roles that people can have, whether that's on the operational side and support side versus on the sales side, whether somebody starts off in a more salaried or hourly role, maybe they're doing some sort of paraplanner role where they're entering in information or doing some basic analysis in financial planning software, something like that. Then maybe they're sort of more in a support advisor role, like a junior advisor type of role, where they're helping or working with a senior advisor that's sort of the rainmaker that brings in the business. And again, every firm's different. There's some firms that everything is done in person in an office. There's other firms that are 100% virtual and they never meet with clients in a physical office. There's some that are a hybrid in between. There's some companies that you will get a book of business given to you. That's rare. There's other companies where you have to build your book of business from scratch, or you may have a small book that's given to you sort of, they used to call them back in the day orphan clients or legacy clients, that if somebody sold them something a long time ago, they're still on the books. They don't really have a real business relationship with anybody, but here you go, Mr. or Mrs. New Financial Advisor, feel free to call them up and see what else they have going on, if you can build a relationship off of that. So it's going to be different across the board, but I think more and more companies now are realizing the need to have a career path, and then also to essentially take the worry out of people being able to essentially support themselves and their family when they're first getting started in the industry. And so it's not necessarily uncommon anymore per se, where maybe it is somewhat uncommon, but I wouldn't call it rare, that companies would say, hey, we're going to pay you a salary, and here's going to be your career path, and here's the how this is projected to play out for you. And again, not all companies are going to do that, but some of them will, especially those that are more maybe planning oriented, where they're kind of have a planning first mentality. Maybe they're charging a separate fee for planning, and that some companies do, some companies don't. Some companies will charge just an assets under management or AUM type of fee, and they may include some sort of planning along with that for free. They may also charge separately for that planning. There might be other firms that will only charge you a flat fee. You hear the phrase fee only sometimes, where they're only charging a fee for the work that they do, whether that's on an ongoing basis or less commonly on a project basis. There's so many different ways that, and that's another thing that kind of makes the industry a little bit like, somebody just dropped you off in a fucking parking lot, and it's not a dealership that has, a particular type of car. It's not like you got dropped off on a Toyota lot or a Honda lot or a Chevy lot or whatever. They've literally dropped you off in a parking lot that has a mishmash of all different types of brands, new cars, used cars, cars that have been in accidents before and are rebuilt, those that have never been driven off the lot. And you kind of have to figure out like what the fuck is going on out there. And that's not just from an advisor standpoint, trying to get onboarded with certain firms and figure out where you may want to go next or where you may want to start, but also from the consumer standpoint. And I think that's one reason that the CFP board does a lot of public awareness and different campaigns to try to at least give people a starting place and say, hey, if you want to work with the highest standard, you at least want to seek out a CFP professional. Like, let's just, it's kind of like saying, hey, we dropped you off in the middle of a lot, but the cars you really want to look for before you start looking at anything else, make sure it's a Toyota or whatever, right? Make sure it's a Honda. Make sure it's a Ford, or maybe not Ford, but whatever. A lot of people think Ford sucks. I don't know. No offense to anybody that drives a Ford. But so, it's going to be different for everybody, but I think there's a lot of effort that's going into trying to develop sort of the next generation of advisors. A, because it's the right thing to do. B, because it makes it somewhat easier for the consumer. And then C, which is often not talked about, the industry has a lot of folks with gray hair that are getting older and older and older. And whether they like it or not, whether they choose to retire or they're just not breathing anymore, they are not going to be here forever. And they're going to need other younger, ostensibly newer advisors to kind of come in and take their place. And so I think that there's a lot of things going on in the industry that are trying to move everybody in a better direction. But that's not what this study's about. I'm just kind of talking a little bit off the cuff here from my personal experience, my professional experience, things that I see, things that I hear. And so there's a bunch of different ways to get involved. Some companies are going to be more investment focused, some are going to be more insurance focused, some are more planning focused. Everybody's compensation structure is different, and there's a lot of nuance to this. And so I think at the end of the day, you kind of sort of have to figure out who you're comfortable with and who can you trust. And not to say that every single CFP is fantastic, but chances are if they've gone through the process to earn that credential, which is not an easy one, by the way. I have several friends and friends in the industry that have not earned it and have attempted to earn it, and for one reason or another, things didn't pan out because there's multiple components to be able to earn that credential. And it is kind of a big deal. So I think for a lot of people, not that the CFP credential is necessarily the end-all be-all, because I do think it's a lot of woo-woo and marketing and bullshit. But at the same time, it does demonstrate, in my opinion, a level of competency and proficiency that you may not necessarily find elsewhere. That's not to say that you have a new CFP versus somebody that's been in the industry for decades that doesn't have the credentials that, the CFP automatically is quote-unquote better. But it is a starting point. It's kind of going back to that analogy with the parking lot. It's like getting dropped off in the parking lot and making sure you're at least looking at vehicles that have a Toyota symbol on them. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful. All right, let's get back to the study here. So let's see here. Wirehouses and independent broker-dealers tend to see higher levels of compensation. That was a little bit surprising. And then they get into a section on financial planner compensation rises with experience. So this is what we would expect. And they took a look at median 2024 total compensation based on years of financial planning work experience. And so there's 4 categories here, from least to most experienced. And obviously the compensation will vary commensurate with that. So the first is for those that have fewer than 5 years of financial planning work experience. Their median 2024 total compensation was only $107,500. Those that have 5 to 10 years of financial planning work experience in 2024, their median total compensation was $148,730. So still a bit low in my opinion. Those that have between 11 and 20 years of financial planning work experience have a 2024 median total compensation of $239,000. And then those with more than 20 years of financial planning experience had a median 2024 total comp of $359,000. Keep in mind, those are median numbers. A little bit later in the study, I'm not going to go through every single one, but I am going to come back to this and give you actually, let me just do this now. They have a 25th percentile and a 75th percentile. Let me see if I can skip over to that. Bear with me here. And then we'll come back just so we can try to stay on the same thing. All right, so detailed compensation. Let's see here. Okay, years of experience. So I just gave you the numbers for the median. Okay, so on this same sheet, the 25th percentile, aka you suck. You're at the bottom of the barrel. 25th percentile, less than 5 years, 90,000. 5 to 10 years experience, 110,000. 11 to 20 years experience, 150,000. And more than 20 years experience, 215,000. Okay, those are all 25th percentile. So obviously those were lower than the median that you heard just a moment ago. Now, if we flip over to the 75th percentile and go through the same exercise with years of experience, now we're getting into some cash here. So fewer than 5 years, 142,750. 5 to 10 years of experience, 204,000. 11 to 20 years of experience, 429,704. And more than 20 years of experience, 640,000. So those are all 75th percentile, meaning that you're doing quite well and essentially better than 74% minimum of the other folks in the industry. So 25th percentile, dog shit. 75th percentile, pretty good. And then the median obviously is going to be between the two at essentially the 50th percentile. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of a glimpse into that. There's people that make a lot less than that, and there's people that make a lot more than that. And I know both. I know, quite frankly, I know a guy who fucking doesn't know his ass from his elbow, and he's probably making between $800,000 and $900,000. I know a couple other guys that aren't CFPs, but they're super sharp, and they're probably making just over $100,000. And I know a lot of people, in the middle. So, it's going to be dependent on a lot of things, from, as we just saw, years of experience, whether or not you have the CFP credential, but also where you work, the type of clientele that you work with, your firm's method of compensation, how you're paid. And, again, that's going to vary widely. But at the end of the day, I think it's fairly safe to say, if you've been around for at least a handful of years and you're in an advisor sort of role, CFP or not, you're probably making a minimum of six figures, which in today's day and age is, you could be making $100,000 a year and eating fucking beans and rice. So that's not necessarily to say that, it's the same as it was 10 or 20 years ago, but you're still, in most places, probably making at least a livable wage, right? So these are pretty good gigs. And the longer you're doing it and the better you are, again, generally, you're going to make quite a bit more money. And there's going to be some drastic jumps, Yeah, that's all I'll say. I don't want to get too detailed on that or too personal on that. I was going to give you my personal story, but there's too many people that listen to this. And if you really want to know, just ask me and I'll tell you. All right, let's see. Financial planners' compensation rises with number of staff supervised. So for those that don't supervise anybody, median total comp in 2024 was $140. Anybody that supervised 1 to 4 people, $225. Supervised 5 or more people, $400,500. So just over $400K. There's different channels. Again, I'm not going to get super detailed on that. We talked about, generous benefits. We went over a lot of that already, so I'm not going to rehash that. They talked about access to retirement plans. Okay, under benefits, financial planners report working a 40-hour week without compromising their personal lives. With a median of 20 days of paid leave and 10 paid holidays per year, financial planners express a strong appreciation for work-life balance. These values allow them to be their best selves both in and out of the office. All right, and then it goes into different types of leave. I guess 26% have unlimited PTO. I would fall into that camp. Big fan of that. Not everybody is. As long as you use it within reason and you're not abusing it, I think it's totally fine. 84% of CFP professionals experience personal fulfillment with their careers. So 53% of us said we had very high fulfillment with our careers. 31% said somewhat high. So those two together make up the 84. 11% were neutral, 3% said somewhat low, and 1% said very low fulfillment with their careers. They're probably in the wrong industry. It is a very rewarding job and career to really be able to help people. It's also a very lucrative career, which is nice, but you kind of have to really have a passion for this stuff, especially when you come across clients here and there that just don't want to take your advice. I have a saying, you can't save them all. You do the best you can, but there's always going to be people out there that no matter how great of advice you give them, they're never going to listen to you. But there's going to be those that do, and they absolutely appreciate you more than you'll ever know. And that's what we do this for, in my opinion. That's what I do this for. So let's see. All right. We talked about that. CFP professionals are satisfied with their career stability. The reason why I laughed earlier and said we'll come back to that, because depending on the type of firm that you work for, and again, not just financial services, but anywhere, I almost think career stability can kind of sort of be thought of as a thing of the past. Now, again, if you work for a large firm versus if you have your own firm or you work for a smaller boutique firm, your level of job security and stability is going to vary. But I don't think there's anybody that's 100%, unless you work and you own the firm or you're a partner in the firm, chances are there's always going to be some degree of risk there. So stability, when you talk about financial advisors, as far as career track, I mean, we're all, as I like to say, very employable. If something happened at one firm, unless we did something just egregious, if they decided that we didn't work there anymore for whatever reason they gave, and we didn't do anything wrong, most of us could easily pick up a job very, very quickly elsewhere. And depending on the type of work that you're doing, and again, comp structures and firm types, it could take a little bit longer or not, depending on what you're looking for. But it's not like you're going to be out of work for an extended period of time in most cases. Work-life balance, 83% of people, they said work-life balance, 79% career advancement, which is funny because they make a comment in here, which we'll probably get into, about the percentage of people that even if they were going to change firms, wanted to stay in a similar type of role or plan to stay in the same role versus those that were looking for advancement. And so even though there's an opportunity for advancement, a lot of people chose not to go that route. And personally, that's something that I've decided to do in my own career, where I've had plenty of chances to move up, if you will, and go back into management and things like that. And I quite frankly have no desire to do that. I like being responsible for me. I like taking care of my clients, and being an individual contributor, I have no desire to do the management thing again. I've done that previously in a different industry in an earlier life, and it was great, learned a lot, but especially in this industry, quite frankly, a lot of financial advisors are fucking assholes. They're arrogant. You might think I'm an arrogant asshole, and you might be partially right, I don't know. But, it's just not an industry that I would typically want to manage others in personally. All right, 76% of people satisfied with, professional development. 73% were satisfied due to compensation. Okay. It says, under job satisfaction, most CFP professionals plan to remain both in the profession and at their current companies, suggesting a positive outlook toward their work and career trajectory. Those intending to stay at their current companies often have a growth mindset, with nearly 3/4 planning to grow their client base or responsibilities. I think that's probably what they meant. Maybe it's poorly worded under career advancement, having that growth mindset and wanting to grow as far as client base or responsibilities. I don't necessarily think it means moving up the proverbial food chain, because if we continue down on that page, it gets into some other numbers. It says 9 in 10 CFP professionals plan to stay with their current employer over the next 2 years, so 89%, roughly 90 versus 11. Of those planning to stay with their current companies, here we go, 74% plan to stay in the same role. That really doesn't surprise me. I think that just speaks volumes to the work that we do and the impact that we can have for advisors wanting to stay in an advisor role and not, trying to move up to the C-suite or whatever. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but a lot of us do this job for the fulfillment reasons that we've talked about, that we get out of doing this type of work, and we don't necessarily have aspirations of taking over, and becoming the next, C-suite executive. It says 19% aim to be promoted within their company's financial planning space. So that's why I said I thought it was interesting when they talked about career advancement, 79%, and then when they kind of divide it out a little bit further and you talk about if you're going to stay with your current company, who wants to be promoted, 19%. Of those who intend to leave their current companies, it says also 74% will stay in the financial planning profession or plan to operate independently. And that's something that's fairly common in the industry. You hear people talk about going independent. You worked for a company or maybe several companies over a period of time, and you decide you want to open up your own shop and hang your own shingle and kind of start your own thing, or maybe you have some partners you want to do that with. That's essentially what they're talking about when they say somebody's going to go independent, or in this case, operate independently. All right, let's see. Half of companies have no more than 20 employees. So 23% of firms have fewer than 5 employees. 28% have between 5 and 20. Then it drops off really sharply. Only 9% of the firms have between 21 and 50 employees. Only 4% of the firms have between 51 and 100 employees. But then it jumps back, and the largest percentage by far, 35% of companies have more than 100 employees. Nearly 3 in 5 financial planners work for a company. 57% work for a company. 38% are self-employed business owners or equity partners of a company. And 5% are an executive of a company but not an owner, according to their study. Leading services provided by financial professionals. You have wealth management and investment planning. That's the top one at 93%. Comprehensive financial planning, 89%. Retirement planning, 84%. Estate and tax planning drops down to 63%. Risk management and insurance focus, 51%. So basically, retirement planning, investment planning, wealth management, and comprehensive financial planning are going to be your big three, right? Those are the primary business focuses for financial professionals, including CFP professionals. The rest of this just breaks down the nitty-gritty, which I told you I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on, and some of you may think I already did. But the next 10 pages goes through detailed survey data and hours worked per week. Well, this is an interesting one. Average 44, median 40. That's not really all that surprising. I mean, it might be to some of you that work, 50, 60, 80 hours a week in some other, line of work. But most of the time, especially once you're a little bit settled and established, most advisors are not working those 60, 80, 100 hour a week, type of roles that some people may at some point in time. I remember back in my previous life, there were times I was working 6 days a week, 80 to 100 hours a week. It was fucking crazy. Never again. But I wouldn't go back and change anything because I learned a lot doing that. All right, then it talks about different designations that are held. Yeah, so again, I'm not going to get into all that, but there's a ton of information here. If anybody is interested and wants me to email this to them, I think this is publicly available, so you should be able to just pick it up. The title, again, is the 2025 Compensation Study put out by the CFP Board of Standards. But if you can't find it or you want a copy of it electronically, just shoot the show an email, realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com, and I'm happy to shoot it over to you. Hopefully that was helpful. Again, if you guys are curious or it's just something that you've ever thought about or maybe you've never thought about it and you're like, oh shit, and you saw the title of the show pop up and you're like, I wonder what that's all about. Here we are. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to email the show, realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. We appreciate you and we will see you in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.